Let's cut through the noise. You think they don't care. You think they're pulling away because they're done. But what if I told you their silence isn't rejection, it's protection? And underneath that quiet distance, there's a hidden cry for connection. You've been blaming yourself, spiraling, wondering what you did wrong, but this isn't about you being too much. It's about them feeling like they're not enough. Avoidant behavior looks cold on the outside, but inside, it's often panic, fear, and a desperate need to feel safe. Today, we're breaking it down. No guesswork, no overthinking, just truth. Because if you care about someone with avoidant tendencies, or you are that someone, this is your wake-up call. Let's go. When someone with avoidant tendencies goes silent or pulls away, it often feels like rejection. To the person on the receiving end, it can seem cold, calculated, or even cruel. But what's really happening behind that withdrawal is far more complex and deeply human. The disappearing act, more often than not, is not about detachment from the other person. It's about self-preservation, a defense mechanism rooted in past experiences, fear of vulnerability, and an unconscious effort to stay emotionally safe. Avoidant attachment styles typically develop in early childhood, often as a response to inconsistent or emotionally distant caregiving. When a child's needs for comfort, affection, and attunement go unmet, or are met with discomfort or punishment, they learn not to rely on others. They begin to internalize the idea that emotional closeness leads to pain, rejection, or shame. So they adapt. They become self-reliant. They suppress their emotional needs, and they begin to believe that the safest route is to stay detached. That childhood adaptation turns into adult behavior, often without them realizing it. So when an avoidant person is confronted with emotional intimacy in adulthood, especially if it's sudden or deep, their nervous system can interpret it as a threat, even if rationally they know it's not. That's when the disappearing act kicks in. It's not that they don't care. In fact, often the opposite is true. They care so much that it terrifies them. But the fear of getting hurt, losing control, or being seen too deeply can feel overwhelming. So they shut down. They create distance, either physically or emotionally. They retreat, not because they're indifferent, but because closeness feels unsafe. This silence, this withdrawal, can be maddening for their partners, friends, or loved ones. It seems like ghosting. It feels like abandonment. But what's happening is that the avoidant person is overwhelmed. They're often caught in a storm of internal dialogue. What if I get too close and it all falls apart? Or if they see the real me, they'll leave anyway. Their inner critic is loud. Their fear of dependency is loud. So they lean on the one coping strategy they've known the longest distance. It's important to understand that the avoidant person doesn't always choose silence intentionally. It's not a game, it's not manipulation, it's a reflex. Just like someone with a fear of heights instinctively backs away from a ledge, someone with avoidant tendencies instinctively backs away from intimacy when it feels too intense. And to them, silence feels like safety. It gives them space to regulate, to calm down, to regain control over their emotions before they become too exposed. But this defense comes at a cost. Because while silence protects them from the perceived threat of vulnerability, it also cuts off the possibility of connection, the very thing they crave but don't know how to access. Many avoidant individuals deeply long for love, closeness, and belonging, but their blueprint for safety tells them that those very things are dangerous. It's a painful paradox. I want to be close to you, but closeness scares me. To someone on the outside, it might look like avoidance equals apathy. But if you look closer, you'll often find subtle signs of care, a message sent late at night after days of silence, a small act of service, a softening in their voice when they feel safe. These are the quiet ways an avoidant person reaches out, not with loud declarations, but with cautious signals. Their disappearing act isn't the absence of feeling. It's a protective shell forged over years of learning that feelings weren't safe to express. The truth is, avoidant individuals often carry shame around their behavior. They know they've hurt people by pulling away. They're aware that their silence is confusing or even hurtful, but they often don't have the tools or the language to do it differently. Emotional expression isn't just uncomfortable for them, it feels foreign. And when they're triggered, they don't always know how to explain why they're shutting down, so they don't. They just disappear, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to show they care in a way that feels safe to them. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior, especially if that silence is used to punish or control. Boundaries are essential, but it does mean recognizing that avoidant silence isn't always what it seems. It can be a hidden cry for help, a way of saying, I'm overwhelmed, I'm scared, I don't know how to do this, but I wish I could. It's a defensive dance that says, I want to connect, but I need to feel safe first. What can make a difference is awareness on both sides. The avoidant person needs to start recognizing when they're withdrawing and why, and begin building the capacity to sit with discomfort rather than run from it. And the person in connection with them can learn not to take the silence personally, while also setting boundaries that honor their own needs for consistency and communication. The disappearing act doesn't mean someone is incapable of love. It means they've learned to love from a distance because it's the only way they've known to feel safe. But with intention, self-work, and often support, it's possible to unlearn that pattern, to pause before pulling away, to speak even if the voice trembles, and to understand that true safety doesn't come from disappearing. It comes from daring to stay. Silence is often misinterpreted. We assume it means disinterest, detachment, or even passive-aggressive punishment. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, silence can serve a very different purpose. It's a shield. It's a way to manage overwhelming emotions, especially the discomfort that comes with vulnerability. While it might look like avoidance from the outside, it's often a complex, unconscious strategy to protect a fragile inner world that's terrified of being seen and heard. People with avoidant attachment styles struggle deeply with vulnerability. They're not wired to express emotional needs easily. Growing up, they may have learned, whether through neglect, inconsistent caregiving, or emotional dismissal, that vulnerability is dangerous. Maybe they were punished for showing sadness. Maybe their attempts to connect were ignored or shamed. So they adapted. They learned that the safest way to be was to keep things surface level, to handle problems alone, and to lock away feelings that might make them seem weak, needy, or exposed. As adults, this ingrained pattern doesn't just go away. In relationships, vulnerability is a natural and necessary part of intimacy. But for the avoidant individual, being emotionally open feels like stepping onto unstable ground. It triggers fear of being rejected, misunderstood, or worse, dependent. They're not trying to be cold or uncaring. They're trying to survive a moment that feels threatening to their emotional equilibrium. That's when silence steps in. It becomes their armor. The quieter they become, the safer they feel. When an avoidant person goes quiet, it's rarely because they've stopped feeling. In fact, the silence often masks a flood of emotions they don't know how to process. Vulnerability might have just been invited into the room through a deep conversation, an emotional request, a conflict, or even genuine closeness. And instead of responding with openness, the avoidant instinct is to shut down. Not because they want to hurt the other person, but because they're overwhelmed, emotionally flooded, and silence becomes the only way they know to stop that flood. This withdrawal isn't always conscious. It's not calculated. It's a default mode, a script written long before their current relationship existed. And the script goes like this. If I open up, I'll lose control. If I lose control, I'll get hurt. If I get hurt, I'll be alone. So I'll stay quiet and deal with it myself. It's a lonely place to be, but it feels safer than the alternative. Vulnerability for the avoidant person isn't just uncomfortable, it feels risky, even dangerous. What makes it even more confusing is that this silence may come right after a moment of connection. Maybe they've shared something personal, maybe they've let someone in a little too close, or maybe they've just started to feel emotions they can't name. And instead of leaning into that experience, they retreat. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real. The silence becomes a retreat into self, a way to regain emotional control by shutting everyone else out. For their partner, friend, or loved one, this behavior can feel like a slap in the face. One moment everything seems fine, maybe even intimate, and the next radio silence. No response to texts, vague excuses, emotional unavailability. It feels personal, it feels like punishment. But in reality, the avoidant person is using silence as a way to soothe their own internal chaos. It's not about the other person doing something wrong, it's about the avoidant person not knowing how to sit with the discomfort of emotional exposure. Silence also serves another function. It keeps the avoidant individual from having to admit, even to themselves, that they do have needs. Saying, I miss you, or I'm struggling would mean acknowledging vulnerability. And that feels too raw, too exposed. So instead, they say nothing. They sit with the ache. They rationalize the distance. They convince themselves they're better off alone, or that needing someone makes them weak. It's painful, but to them, it feels like strength. Silence becomes a misguided form of control over feelings that feel unmanageable. There's also an element of shame tied into this silence. Many avoidant people feel embarrassed about their emotional struggles. They may believe that expressing their feelings will lead to judgment or abandonment, so they stay silent, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and feel unequipped to handle the outcome if they were to speak up. Vulnerability is tangled with fear, and silence is the only path they can see in the moment that keeps that fear at bay. But here's the truth. Silence, while protective, is also a prison. It creates a wall where there could be a bridge. It deepens the disconnection they're already afraid of. And ironically, it brings about the very outcome they fear: emotional distance, relationship strain, even breakups. Because while they use silence to shield themselves from vulnerability, it also blocks the flow of intimacy, trust, and communication. The very things they crave remain just out of reach. For the avoidant person to move forward, they have to begin the difficult process of recognizing silence not as safety, but as avoidance. They need to learn that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the foundation of real connection. That speaking up, even imperfectly, is more powerful than disappearing. It's not easy. It takes time, practice, and often the support of therapy or self-work, but it's possible. And for those in relationships with avoidant individuals, it helps to reframe the silence. It's not always rejection. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's a heart that's never been taught how to speak its truth. That doesn't mean tolerating hurtful behavior, but it does mean seeing the silence as a signal, not of anchors, but of inner conflict. Silence as a shield is a survival tool. It's been learned, rehearsed, and reinforced over time, but survival isn't the same as living. And connection requires the path toward deeper relationships isn't through perfect communication. It's through honest, vulnerable moments that say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here. When an avoidant person starts to find the courage to break their silence, not with dramatic declarations, but with small truths, they begin to unlock the door they've kept closed for so long. And what waits on the other side isn't danger, it's connection. Mixed signals are one of the most confusing and painful aspects of being close to someone with an avoidant attachment style. One moment, they're warm, engaged, even affectionate. The next, they're distant, unavailable, or completely silent. It can feel like emotional whiplash, and the inconsistency often leaves their partners or loved ones walking on eggshells, trying to decode every word, every look, every delay in response. But these mixed signals aren't games or manipulation. They're a reflection of an internal tug-of-war between the desire for closeness and the fear of it. At their core, they're often a hidden plea for safety, for connection that doesn't feel threatening. To understand why someone might send mixed messages, you have to recognize what's going on beneath the surface. For the avoidant person, relationships are a source of both longing and anxiety. They want intimacy, but the vulnerability that comes with it feels deeply uncomfortable. When they feel close to someone, they might light up, they may show affection, share details about their lives, or open up emotionally. In those moments, their defenses are lowered and they feel seen and connected. But as soon as that intimacy crosses a certain threshold, something inside them triggers. A wall goes up, the fear creeps in, and instead of leaning in further, they pull back. This push-pull dynamic is confusing, not only for the other person involved, but often for the avoidant individual themselves. They don't always understand why they go cold after moments of warmth. They might tell themselves they're just not ready, or that something feels off. But in reality, they've hit an internal limit, an emotional ceiling that tells them this is too much. The fear of losing control, of being engulfed, or of ultimately being rejected often hijacks their ability to stay present in the relationship. So they back off, sometimes subtly, sometimes drastically. Mixed signals often show up in behaviors that look like inconsistency. Texting regularly, then disappearing for days, making plans and then canceling them without clear reasons. Sharing something vulnerable, then becoming emotionally unavailable. These patterns aren't intentional, but they are protective. When an avoidant person feels vulnerable after expressing closeness, their instinct is to regain emotional control by creating distance. This helps them feel safe again, even if it confuses or hurts the other person. It's not that they don't care. It's that caring feels risky. When you've been conditioned to associate emotional dependence with disappointment or pain, the moment someone gets too close can feel like stepping into dangerous territory. So the avoidant person sends signals that say, I want you, and then almost immediately stay back. They're not trying to play with emotions. They're trying to find a safe distance where they can feel close enough without feeling overwhelmed. What makes this especially difficult is that the avoidant person might not be able to articulate what's happening. They may not even be consciously aware of the pattern. All they know is that something feels too intense and they need to withdraw. That withdrawal sends a message of disinterest, which contradicts the moments of warmth that came before. And for their partner, this inconsistency can be devastating. It creates doubt, anxiety, and often self-blame. Did I say too much? Was I too needy? Are they losing interest? But the truth is, the avoidant person is often caught between two competing needs: the need for connection and the need for autonomy. Both are valid, but they often haven't learned how to integrate them. So instead of balancing closeness with space, they swing from one extreme to the other. The closeness feels good until it doesn't. The distance feels safe until it becomes isolating. And so they go back and forth, not to hurt anyone, but because they don't yet know another way to be in a relationship. This doesn't mean they're incapable of love or commitment. In fact, many avoidant individuals deeply desire a meaningful connection, but they often believe that being truly known will lead to rejection, or that depending on someone else will make them weak. So they hold back even when they want to lean in. Their mixed signals are like a test. Can I be close to you without losing myself? Can you accept me even when I need space? Will you still be here if I take a step back? It's a silent plea for reassurance, but they don't always know how to ask for it directly. These patterns can shift with awareness and intentional effort. The avoidant person has to begin noticing when they feel triggered by closeness and learn to pause instead of react. That might look like saying, I need a little space to think, but I care about you, instead of going silent for days. It might mean practicing small acts of vulnerability, even if they feel awkward or scary. Over time, these new behaviors start to create a more stable emotional rhythm, one where connection isn't followed by withdrawal, and closeness isn't automatically met with fear. For those on the receiving end of mixed signals, understanding the pattern can bring some peace of mind. It doesn't mean you have to tolerate unhealthy behavior or neglect your own needs. But it does mean recognizing that the inconsistency is often rooted in fear, not rejection, and that the avoidant person may be trying in their own way to figure out how to stay close without feeling exposed. Clear communication and boundaries are key. You can let someone know it's confusing when you're hot and cold and I need more consistency to feel secure. That's not an ultimatum, it's a truth. And sometimes it gives the avoidant person the clarity they need to recognize their pattern and start working through it. But you also have to decide what you're willing to accept and what you're not, because love shouldn't feel like a guessing game. At its heart, the presence of mixed signals is a reflection of inner conflict. The avoidant person isn't withholding affection because they don't care. They're doing it because the risk of closeness feels emotionally unsafe. Their heart is reaching out, even while their instincts are pulling them back. Understanding this doesn't erase the hurt, but it does create space for compassion. And sometimes that compassion paired with clear boundaries and a willingness to grow is what starts to shift the dynamic toward real, lasting connection. When someone with an avoidant attachment style begins to pull away, it's easy to assume the worst. Maybe they've lost interest, maybe they don't care, maybe they're done. But often the opposite is true. What looks like emotional withdrawal is, in many cases, a deeply ingrained coping mechanism. One meant not to push others away for good, but to preserve themselves in moments that feel overwhelming. Avoidant behavior is rarely about a lack of feelings. It's about too many feelings that they don't know how to process. So they retreat not to reject connection, but to survive it. Avoidant individuals are not emotionless. They experience the full range of feelings, sometimes even more intensely than they let on. But instead of expressing those emotions outwardly, they internalize them. Vulnerability for them can feel unsafe or even shameful. If they grew up in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, ignored, or punished, they learned early on that pulling away was safer than leaning in. That early lesson turns into an adult habit. And so when intimacy surfaces, whether it's during an argument, a heartfelt moment, or a deepening relationship, they instinctively pull back, not because they want distance, but because they're trying to protect their inner world. This pattern of withdrawing is often misread as detachment, but it's more accurate to think of it as emotional overload. The avoidant person feels so much that they need space to regulate. Pulling away is their attempt to regain a sense of control. It's how they breathe when closeness feels suffocating. They're not trying to abandon the relationship, they're trying to stabilize themselves within it. Ironically, the people who love them most tend to experience the pullback as abandonment, and understandably so. When communication becomes sparse, affection fades, or plans get canceled, it sends a message that something is wrong. For the partner, friend, or loved one, it creates uncertainty and emotional insecurity. But what's happening inside the avoidant person isn't a calculation to hurt or confuse. It's a reactive strategy to keep themselves from feeling exposed, overwhelmed, or dependent. Dependency, in particular, is something many avoidant individuals have learned to fear. Relying on others often feels like weakness, and the idea of needing someone can bring up feelings of shame or anxiety. So when a relationship becomes emotionally intense, even in a positive way, they may begin to feel like they're losing their grip on their independence. That sensation is scary, not because they don't love or care, but because love makes them vulnerable to loss, disappointment, or failure. And for them, vulnerability has long been associated with pain. So they pull away, they cancel, they go quiet. They become vague, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. But this isn't a form of punishment or rejection. It's an internal safety protocol kicking in. Their nervous system is signaling that closeness has crossed an invisible line, and they need to retreat to feel safe again. This isn't about the other person doing something wrong. It's about the avoidant person's own emotional threshold being exceeded. What makes this especially hard is that avoidant people often can't explain this behavior as it's happening. They might not fully understand their own emotional responses. All they know is that something feels off, and their go-to response is to back away. Later, they might regret the distance or feel guilty for how their behavior affected someone they care about. But in the moment, they feel trapped by their need for space, and the only way they know how to reclaim safety is to create distance. It's also important to recognize that pulling away is not always about the other person. The avoidant individual may be facing stress in other areas of life, work, health, unresolved personal issues that amplify their discomfort with emotional closeness. When multiple stressors pile up, their capacity for connection decreases. Instead of reaching out for support, which would require vulnerability, they isolate, they go silent. And again, it looks like disconnection, but it's really a form of emotional triage. They're overwhelmed, and the first thing to shut down is the part of them that requires the most energy to maintain intimacy. For those in relationships with avoidant individuals, this can be incredibly frustrating and painful. It creates a constant sense of unpredictability. One day things feel close, the next they feel cold. But understanding that the pulling away is not a dismissal, but a defense, can offer a shift in perspective. It's not personal, it's patterned. And with the right tools, it can change. Healing for the avoidant person begins with recognizing the pattern. They have to learn that space doesn't always equal safety, and closeness doesn't always lead to pain. That takes time, patience, and often therapeutic support, but it also takes courage. Because allowing themselves to stay present in the face of discomfort is the exact opposite of what their instincts tell them to do. And yet, it's the only way to build a relationship that feels secure, not just for their partner, but for themselves. On the other side, the person who experiences this pulling away also has work to do. That means setting clear boundaries, not abandoning their own emotional needs in an effort to maintain peace, and communicating openly about how the withdrawal affects them. It's not about fixing the avoidant person, it's about holding space for growth while protecting your own heart. It means recognizing the pullback not as rejection, but as fear, and deciding with honesty whether the relationship is one where that fear can be met with compassion and mutual effort toward connection. At its core, pulling away to preserve is a survival mechanism. It's the body and mind trying to keep the self intact in situations that feel overwhelming. But survival isn't the same as thriving. An emotional self-preservation at the cost of connection leaves both people in the relationship feeling isolated. The real transformation begins when the avoidant person starts to trust that they can survive vulnerability, that they can stay even when it's hard, that love doesn't have to mean losing themselves, and that closeness, when it's chosen instead of feared, can be the very thing that helps them feel safe at last. Avoidant silence is not always a sign of indifference. It is often a deeply rooted, protective response to emotional vulnerability. Beneath the withdrawal, the mixed signals, the hesitancy to open up, lies a powerful and unspoken yearning for connection. These behaviors are not about manipulation or apathy. They're about fear, fear of being hurt, fear of losing autonomy, fear of needing someone and not knowing how to express it. When avoidant individuals go quiet, what they often want most is to be understood without having to expose the tender, raw parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime shielding. Recognizing these patterns doesn't mean accepting emotional distance without question, but it does invite a new level of empathy and awareness. For healing to occur, both sides must engage with honesty, one with a willingness to face discomfort and stay open, the other with clarity, boundaries, and compassion. Growth comes when silence is no longer used as a shield, but is replaced with brave small steps toward real dialogue. Connection isn't forged in perfection. It's built in those messy, uncertain moments when someone chooses to stay present. And for the avoidant heart, learning to stay is the beginning of finally being seen.